La Bamba does not play like a music movie. It plays like a countdown with a smile on its face. You see the talent, you see the family, you see a kid moving like the world is finally opening for him. Then you feel the trap closing anyway. And the weird part is, the making of it had the same pressure. The casting started in the wrong place, and one brother mistake nearly sent the whole movie sideways. The songs were rebuilt from scratch, so his rise could feel present tense, like it was happening right now. And the film calls it fate, but real life was a grind so brutal it left scars you can still feel in the scenes. These are 10 weird facts about La Bamba, the biopic that brought Ritchie Valens back to life, then made you watch how quickly he was taken away. Number 1. La Bamba didn't start with a pitch, it started with a sound that climbed 6 floors and wouldn't let go. Opening night of Zoot Suit on Broadway, Luis Valdez and his brother Daniel were upstairs in a dressing room riding that post-curtain adrenaline, already asking the dangerous question every creator asks too soon. What comes next? And then, down on 7th Street, mariachis began playing La Bamba in the middle of Manhattan. Not a soundtrack, not a rehearsal, a real street performance echoing up into the room like a signal. Luis looked out, saw it, and the next film didn't feel chosen, it felt delivered. But a moment is not a movie. For years, Daniel Valdez chased the story like it was smoke. There were no clean biographies to lean on, no neat timeline packaged for Hollywood, just a legend frozen in 1959, with huge pieces missing. Clue after clue died, names went nowhere, doors stayed shut. The only thing they had was the feeling from that night, and the stubborn belief that it meant something. Then the first living thread finally appeared, Bob Morales, not in a studio office, in a bar in San Juan Bautista. One conversation, face to face, and the myth suddenly had a heartbeat. Bob didn't show up trying to look good. He didn't polish anything. When Valdez asked for truth, Bob handed him the ugly parts too. The anger, the damage, the chaos inside the family. And then he gave permission to put it on screen anyway, even if it made him look like the pressure point instead of the hero, because that's what unlocked La Bamba's real spine. The movie wasn't built on nostalgia, it was built on a chance street performance, years of dead ends, and one brother willing to be seen clearly. And once that door opened, the story didn't get easier, it got heavier. Number 2. La Bamba almost picked the wrong heartbeat. Early on, the story didn't belong to Ritchie Valens, it belonged to Bob Morales. The first script leaned into the older brother's gravity, his volatility, his grief, the way he could fill a room and poison it at the same time. Ritchie's rise wasn't the engine yet, it was the thing circling the engine. That's why the finished film still treats Bob like a main character, because for a long time, he was the main character. Then casting walked in and flipped the whole machine. Lou Diamond Phillips showed up ready to fight for Bob. That was his first target, the harder part, the heat, the intimidation. He leaned into that energy like it was the only way to earn his way into the movie. But Luis Valdez watched him and saw the opposite. Not the explosion, the quiet center. Valdez hit him with the kind of note that doesn't feel like direction, it feels like a rejection. You're not tough enough for Bob. And that should have ended it. Instead, Valdez sent him home with a dare. Sleep, study Ritchie's lines, come back in the morning and prove you can shrink yourself without disappearing. Phillips returned, and the temperature changed. The performance wasn't trying to dominate the room anymore, it was trying to hold it. And suddenly, the role that looked smaller became the one that carried the whole film. The strangest twist is how perfectly the swap landed across the cast. Esai Morales initially circled the project from the other side, drawn toward Ritchie before the movie's center of gravity locked. The roles were still fluid, everything was still unstable. Then the story finally chose its shape, and the casting followed it. Even the real-world details feel like they're mocking the illusion. On screen, Phillips is the younger brother, and Morales is the older. In real life, Phillips was actually older. That meant Phillips had to project youth, sweetness, and vulnerability while being the older man in the room. He had to play smaller on purpose, and that restraint became the secret weapon, because once the film stopped orbiting Bob and finally centered Ritchie, the brother conflict didn't weaken, it sharpened. Number 3. La Bamba didn't film in a sealed Hollywood bubble, it filmed with the real witnesses in the room. Ritchie Valens' family was on set constantly, close enough to feel every line land, close enough to correct details, close enough to relive things they had spent decades trying not to replay. And the movie didn't just keep them nearby, it literally put them inside the frame. Ritchie's real mother appears in the film during the early family party sequence, a quiet blink and you miss it moment that changes the temperature, because now it isn't only a story about her son, it's her standing inside the recreation of her own life. For Lou Diamond Phillips, that presence made acting feel secondary. He wasn't performing for a camera, he was performing in front of people who still carried the loss in their bodies. Over time, something unsettling happened. The family stopped treating him like an actor doing an impression. They started calling him Ritchie, not as a cute nickname, as recognition, like they were testing whether the memory could safely live in someone else's face for a few hours without breaking them. Then the timing turned cruel. Ritchie's mother, Connie Valenzuela, was already sick during production, but she held on long enough to see the finished film. She attended the premiere on July 24, 1987. 3 months later, on October 18, 1987, she died at 72 and was buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery, in the same grave as her son. Real life didn't wait for the credits. It shut the door the moment the story finally reached the public. That's why La Bamba feels heavier than a standard biopic. The family wasn't consulting, they were surviving the reenactment. And that pressure leads straight into the next truth. The film didn't preserve Ritchie's music like a museum piece. It rebuilt it so it could live again. Number 4. Most music biopics treat the original tracks like holy relics. La Bamba did the opposite. The vocals you hear are not Ritchie Valens. They are Los Lobos re-singing and re-recording the entire spine of his sound, so the music would feel present tense, not archival, cleaner, fuller, alive. Not because history needed polishing, but because the movie needed the audience to feel the rush the way the kids in those clubs felt it. And Los Lobos did not knock it out in a cozy side project window. They were recording the whole film soundtrack while also making their own album, By the Light of the Moon. At Sunset Sound in Hollywood, they bounced between rooms like a relay team, building Ritchie's legacy in one studio and chasing their own future in the next. Then the film makes the trick even bolder. It does not hide the band behind the curtain. Los Lobos appear on screen as the group playing La Bamba in the Tijuana sequence, so the voices powering the movie are literally standing inside the world of it. It sounds reborn because it was reborn. And that rebirth leads straight into the next pressure point, because this film did not have unlimited money to make magic. It had limits, tight ones, and you can feel them shaping everything. Number 5. La Bamba looks warm and confident on screen. Off-screen, it was made like a hustle. Tight money, tight time, no cushion. Lou Diamond Phillips did not step into this with a movie star check waiting. He worked for scale, about $1,100 a week, barely more than $6,000 for the whole shoot. And the part that stings is how quickly the film's reality started echoing Ritchie. Phillips took that first real paycheck and split it the way a working-class family splits everything. Half went straight to his mother after her divorce. The cameras stopped, the bills did not. Within months, he was nearly broke. The movie introduced him to Hollywood, then immediately reminded him what survival still feels like. That same pressure reached all the way up to the director's chair. Luis Valdez was hired as the writer. Taylor Hackford was positioned to direct. Then the production ran into the one wall you cannot charm your way around: cost. Hackford became too expensive for the film they could actually afford to make, so the project did not pivot, it tightened. Hackford stayed on as executive producer, and Valdez stepped behind the camera himself, not as a vanity move, because the story could not survive another round of reshuffling. Then, the part nobody expected happened. The little strapped production hit theaters, and the pressure turned into momentum. Number 6. It was meant to be modest, a personal project with limited expectations. Then 1987 arrived, and the response immediately said otherwise. The box office climbed to around $54 million worldwide, the kind of run that tells you people were not just watching a biopic, they were showing up for a story that felt unfinished in the culture. But the real takeover happened after the credits, because the soundtrack did not stay supporting. Los Lobos rebuilt the songs with fresh energy, and the world treated that new version like it belonged to the moment. In September 1987, their La Bamba hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album went double platinum. Ritchie's voice, reimagined through another band, became something fans could replay until the movie stopped being a movie and started feeling like a memory you carried around.